Wait a minute. I understand we do have Bob Weiner with us.
Yes, hi, Alan.
Hey, Bob, how are you? Let me introduce you. Bob Weiner's joining us as well, out of Rome. Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey. He's also former chief of staff for the House Committee on Aging. Good to have you back.
Good to be with you, Alan, and I'm sorry you don't see that when liberals are also included in the targeting, that it doesn't make it right for either. This law should be changed to be exclusive, not primary, which they changed it to.
But why do you want to ignore what really is the elephant in your room that you must hate right now? And that is, of course, contrary to their original claims in the middle of last week anyway, and you've made them here before, according to the Treasury IG report, there was disproportionate scrutinizing of conservatives versus liberals because while both may have been flagged, both were not referred to other units for additional scrutiny. Are you willing to acknowledge that disparity, Bob Weiner?
I'm going to make the point that you got to make, that the law says exclusive. It doesn't say primarily.
Do you acknowledge the disparity in scrutiny between the two groups? Do you acknowledge the disparity in treatment between the two groups? Some liberals were flagged like most conservative groups were flagged, but unlike all conservative groups who were then referred to other units for further scrutiny, those liberal groups were not. This is what we got from the IG report. Do you acknowledge the words that are coming out of my mouth?
I acknowledge your words. I also acknowledge the fact that all of it should have been flagged. None of these political groups, liberal or conservative, should be allowed under the exclusive
That doesn't address
law.
the measure to which I'm now specifically referring. Do you acknowledge that only conservative groups were referred to other units for additional scrutiny, not both? If you don't acknowledge that, I can't let you stay on the air because I can't talk to anybody. I'm not kidding you. I'll say it to Amy, too, and I've done it with her as well. I cannot take seriously anybody who points to a piano and calls it a fishbowl. Now, that is a nucleic, absolute truth to which I refer. I have to ask you, or I'm going to have to let you go. Do you acknowledge that the IG pointed out that, disproportionately speaking, conservatives were referred to other units for scrutiny while liberal groups were not? Do you acknowledge that?
By 3-1. The one is not justifiable either. Those are the facts.
Do you acknowledge what I stated, though, with the IG report?
I acknowledge what I just said. That's the fact. 3-1, 100-30. Those are the facts and proportions. If you don't want to acknowledge
it's not 100-30.
100-30, Amy even said that to us in an email.
No. You're saying 100-30 as if all we're talking about are Tea Party groups. There were over 300 conservative groups in total, 90 to 100 of which were Tea Party. So I default to my original question.
No, that's not actually.
That's a false disparity. That's a false disparity. You're trying to argue a contrast where there is no difference. Do you recognize what the IG report, even the Huffington Post reported that the IG reported that conservatives were the ones? No, what?
Disproportionate. Disproportionate is accurate by 3-1. That's actually the fact, and that's a shame. That's wrong, but it's wrong on all counts.
Bob, are you there?
I am.
All right, there you go. Yes, both were similarly flagged, but not equally flagged. However, only one was ever turned over for additional scrutiny, even as per the paragraph that supported your earlier argument, Bob Weiner.
Well, the thing that bothers me, Alan, and I mean, we've all given a lot of thought to this, and nobody wants the IRS targeting any political groups. Nobody wants the IRS to allow tax-free contributions for people like Karl Rove.
No, Bob, you were saying before it was a 3-to-1 ratio, and it was not a 3-to-1 ratio when it comes to people who were referred for additional scrutiny.
The question
it was a 3-to-1 ratio as far as flagging. It was not a 3-to-1 ratio as far as being referred to for additional scrutiny.
How many Tea Party groups were disapproved? My understanding is that none of either side essentially was
That's
disapproved.
not a measure of how many people were subjected to additional scrutiny.
It's a huge measure.
It's
That's
not the
reality.
measure of why.
If
No, it just meant they passed
forward.
muster. It is not a measure of why one group was disproportionately focused upon than another. It only says what the results of that are, but the results does not excuse the difference of treatment at the outset. Amy Ryan, I understand we do have you back?
Correct.
Amy,
yes.
I was mentioning the article that you had shared with Bob and I as related to Reason Magazine. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, I was referencing that the very paragraph on which Bob predicated his 3-to-1 argument came from the following from that Reason article. The Reason magazine had said, the Inspector General stressed that 100% of the groups with Tea Party patriots and 9/12 in their name were flagged for extra attention, while only 30% of the groups with Progress or Progressive were highlighted as potentially political. Bottom line, though, is we can also look at the Huffington Post, and what the Huffington Post says is the following, and then I want you to comment. Here's what it said. The headline is this: IRS investigator, meaning he's the one who's saying the following, all right? Tea Party groups were scrutinized more than progressive organizations. Let me repeat that. Tea Party groups were scrutinized more than progressive organizations. All right? Now, what the Huffington Post goes on to say is that this disparity in treatment did not stop there. But, Amy, go ahead and comment.
Yeah, absolutely. The Tea Party groups were being asked many questions that were just absolutely ridiculous, like the content of their prayers, the boards that members of the families of their board members belong to, things that have never traditionally been, or under the law been, questions that you need to ask in order to get a 501c4 approved. Now, let's be clear about what a 501c4 is. It's a social welfare organization that is allowed to work on political activities as long as no more than 50% of its activities are political. So you are allowed to do politics, but you can't do 100% or even 51% politics. When people give to a 501c4, they cannot deduct the donation. They just give it away. It's gone, no tax deduction. So it is not subsidized by the Treasury in the way a 501c3, which is a charitable organization, would be. And what Bob has been saying throughout this show, and what the left has been saying as its tactic, is that we shouldn't have 501c4s do politics, which is a very different question. And that's why he mentioned Karl Rove a minute ago. He's saying that we shouldn't have 501c4s do politics. That has nothing to do with whether or not they were treated fairly in the application force. But
okay, stop right there. Stop right there.
Let me just throw in.
All right, go ahead.
I do need to respond to that.
We notice that they're opposed to conservatives having C4s. They're so opposed to it, even when the scandal comes out, what they're talking about is we shouldn't be allowed to have it.
Do I
Bob,
get
what
point?
about that? Go ahead. Answer those two.
Well, the point is Amy says under the law. She's wrong. It's not under the law. It's under the regulations that IRS changed the law, which says exclusively to primarily. There is no 51% under the law. That is an outrage, and many congressmen have been raising that point. So you shouldn't be having Karl Rove do politics and getting a tax deduction for it.
Well, absent measures to the contrary, it looks as if majority, minority are terms that can be brought to 51-49% measures.
Not when it says exclusively. There is no primarily in the word exclusively.
The regulation has sat that way for years and years.
Yeah,
and years.
that's right.
Now,
and it's wrong.
All right, let me share something else because I'm looking at the clock and I want to share this. Bob, this from the Huffington Post. Again, they reference the fact that, of course, the IG has come out. Well, this is what they say specifically. The Treasury Inspector General's office said that while the Internal Revenue Service screened both progressive and conservative groups between 2010 and 2012, the latter, meaning conservatives, faced more scrutiny. It goes on to say, in a letter to Representative Sandy Levin, D. out of Michigan, Russell George, the Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration, defended his initial audit from accusations that it did not provide a full picture of IRS screening practices for tax-exempt organizations. The reason his team did not mention progressive organizations, George explained, was that they had been subjected to a different level of scrutiny. This is the IG guy himself. Goes on to say, whereas conservative groups were flagged as potential political cases on so-called be on the lookout BOLO lists, no instructions were given to IRS agents about how to handle their progressive counterparts. This is from the Huffington Post, not exactly a bastion of right-wingardry. Bob Weiner.
Even President Obama said disproportionate targeting is wrong. That there's no disagreement among all of us on that. Where the investigation falls flat in his face is when ISA, the chairman of the House Government Operations Committee, says that it reached to Obama. He has no evidence whatsoever that Obama was involved. Zero evidence.